All right, here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2. Welcome, everyone, to a special edition of the Covenant Table podcast. A special edition because my friend Bob Thune is here. Bob and I have been friends for a long time. And Bob's the pastor of Coram Deo Church in Omaha, Nebraska. You've written a book that has blessed a lot of people, the gospel-centered life. You also write for the Gospel Coalition, and this has been a running joke that, like, Bob will exit the room, and with our friends, I'm like, he just went in the other room to write a PDF that actually we all want now. You're also I'm going to continue making jokes.
I do have a lot of PDFs.
You do have a lot of PDFs, and they're very helpful. And you're a fellow at the Keller Center for Cultural Apologetics. What's fascinating about that is they asked me so many times to do that, so many times.
You
and
turned them down.
I just kept on saying no. And finally you stepped up and did it. So it's really, I love that joke. I was obviously never asked to do that. You're on there. And just as a thinker, I've really benefited from our friendship. But we're going to be talking about spiritual friendship. And we're actually, our church is going through a series of 7 rhythms of discipleship. It's like a 2-year thing we're doing. We're doing books of the Bible in there as well. But we're going to be spending a significant season on spiritual friendship. And here you are, Bob Thune, my friend, to talk about it.
Your voice sounds so good in my headphones. I'm just sort of like, it's like I could just close my eyes and just it's EQ'd so well. I like the sound of your voice in these headphones. Oh gosh, here we go. It's amazing. You guys have the
Dude,
the
this
haze
is
machine.
A surprise for you. This is a surprise for you.
This makes the podcast.
As
right
you
here. This
as my friend, we just surprised you with the haze.
It's unbelievable.
We just surprised you with the haze. Look how much haze. I
made a joke about when Steve came here to Covenant, and I found out, like, you guys have a lot of cool resources here. One of the things you have is a haze machine. We don't have one of those. I
feel a little sad for you.
I was joking in my church about, like, I'm going to preach at my friend Steve's church, and they have a haze machine, and I'm really hopeful that they will really overwhelm me with some cool haze.
We just blessed you with some haze.
You did. It was amazing. And now it's gone. It's like disappears into the ether.
You're a better person as of right now.
I kind of wish we could keep that going for the whole podcast. I think I would have more wise things to say.
We can do just like a whole.
If we could just keep
like
it going.
A room filled with haze. Guys, I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you did that. Just awesome. Out of nowhere.
There's just smoke coming out of the table.
Pete and Tanner.
This is legit, guys.
Yeah. I mean, once you get Bob Thune going on the haze, he won't stop.
That's awesome.
You just demand the haze. So we're talking about spiritual friendship. And here's like the central contention that the call of the gospel is a call into relationship with the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And Jesus says this amazing thing in John 15, "No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I've called you friends. For all that I've heard from the Father, I've made known to you." And this is in a passage where his central command that he reemphasizes is, again, is love one another. Love one another. And the implication is, hey, I've called you friends, Lord Jesus to us.
I think we should stop and just think about how beautiful that is. And how much maybe we underestimate. Like, I think we, as Christians, we know that Jesus has forgiven our sins. We know that he's the Son of God. We know he died on the cross. We know he rose from the dead. But just the fact that he says to his disciples, "Hey, I've called you my friends," and that what we're invited into is friendship with Jesus, not just belief in Jesus for forgiveness, but actually like a kind of fellowship, communion with the Father, Son, and Spirit, friendship with Jesus. That's a really profound.
It is.
That's a profound thing, it's one of the things I think that makes Christianity unique. And I mean, what other religious system is there where the one who reconciles you to the Father, who forgives your sin, also calls you friends?
Yeah. Jesus, who is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, like such a high vision in the Bible of a cosmic Jesus, over all creation, Lord of everything, is the one who doesn't just call us servants, but calls us friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good place to hang out. And also, not only has Jesus called us to be, he's called us friends, but he calls us to pursue friendship with each other. And so that's like one of the contentions of this rhythm of discipleship, is that our culture is moving in such an individualistic direction that I'm going to mess up the word individualistic, but that this is a countercultural move to say, hey, you're actually called to pursue and prioritize friendship. And not a lot of people are doing that today. We're like even isolated and like what we do for recreation. Of course, that famous book, Bowling Alone, Robert Putnam, people used to do recreation together. You're in a league, like you're in like a card league or a bowling league. And now not only do more people like bowl alone, but we do recreation alone, like Netflix alone on our phone, on our devices. Even what we do for fun, a lot of times is spent individualistically. What do you think are the implications of that?
I had to go stand in line at the the Wi-Fi store. Where I live, it's Cox. I don't know what it is out here, but it's like the provider that gives you your internet. I had to go stand in line, so there's like 7 people in line.
It's like home internet.
Yeah,
okay.
And everybody just had to take a number, and so they were all just on their phones. Even though we were all sitting in a space not a whole lot bigger than this studio, but it's just like no one was even making eye contact with each other, because that's just what we do. Is we go, well, if I have 5 minutes, I'll just go on my phone and do something. And what I think, there's a ton of implications of that, but one of them is I'm not sure we know how to be bored, how to have conversations with strangers, how to just strike up a conversation with somebody, because nobody does that anymore. And so all of those things are, I would just say, like, as I think about my own kids, there's a way in which my generation had to learn how to have conversations with people because we didn't have those kinds of technologies. Now, more and more, you can get by in life without ever learning how to have a conversation with someone. And so I think even before we get to the category of friendship, if we just have the category of
conversation,
interaction, with a human,
interaction with people,
you don't have to interact with a human if you don't want to.
Yeah, I was contrasting my college experience especially as a college freshman, sophomore, with my youngest daughter's college experience as a freshman and sophomore. Like, I showed up at school, there's a long distance phone that you pay extra for, and you're just in a place with people you don't know. So you're like, okay, I guess I'll hang out and let's make some friends. We all need some friends, or we're just like here alone. Yeah. Versus, my youngest daughter talking about being away at school, and people are keeping up through their friends at home, but only through social media, and actually isolating in their rooms and feeling less of an impetus to actually, connect with people on the hall.
Yeah, so I think one of the practical things that Christians have to do here, Steve, is to just choose to be countercultural in the sense of just like cultivating community and friendship. So the first move toward friendship is just a decision to say, okay, I'm actually going to work. I'm going to do the work it takes to like get to know other human beings, because even that little move, that little move in your mind from, am I going to care about that? If I decide yes, then at least I have made a decision to try to move toward people. One of the ways this looks for me is when I go to a store now, so many stores are like self-checkout, where it's just like, go to this computer screen, check yourself out.
You don't even have to interact with a human being to get out of the store.
I always go to the line with a real person, just because I'm like, hey, it's part of the way I'm trying to discipline myself to say, no, I want to have human interactions, even if they're like brief and totally commercial, and I'm just handing them some dollars and they're handing me some products. There's still something human about that.
Yeah. That's really interesting. It is weird, like, because hey, back in the day, you don't just put a card in a machine. Right. You hand someone some money. They might actually touch your hand,
right? Yeah.
giving you the change back.
Yes.
In actual human interaction. So what are you doing as a pastor, the lead pastor of Coram Deo Church, to encourage people to lean into community, groups, friendship, and not just how the wider culture is deforming us by making us be like, if we just go with the status quo and kind of go with the flow, the culture is moving us to be more isolated and individualistic in all the rhythms of our lives.
Yeah.
What are you doing to kind of call people to friendship counterculture?
I mean, one is we're a very low tech church, so we try to just not use technology when we don't have to. As we're on a
That's why you
podcast
don't
here
have
talking
Hayes.
about.
You do have a podcast.
We do.
Oh, you do have a weekly podcast.
So, but
Sadly, no
But what I
Hayes.
mean by that is, like, I have a rule. This is one of my rules that I invented, 15 years ago. If someone's on stage reading from the Bible, they're reading from a real copy of the Bible. Like, one of my rules is, like, don't ever read something off your iPhone. Not because there's a moral should there, but just because we're trying to communicate to people that, like, hey, this is a place where, like, presence should be valued over technology. So there's
We'll
just
like
little
put our phones down.
Yeah,
for a
there's
while.
little things like that where it's just we're trying to say, like, we don't do the, like, QR code stuff. Those are not right or wrong issues, but they're just ways for us that we're trying to say, like, hey, let's try to keep the church a place where we care about actual human interactions. But having said that, we have all the same challenges that anyone else does, which is, like, yeah, we live in a super technological world and a world that tends to devalue the importance of friendship. And that I think one of the mistakes we make is that friendship is kind of about what works for me. I mean, it's less about technology and more about the way individualism has shaped what it means for you to be my friend, Steve, is you validate everything I already think. And if you don't do that, then you're not my friend.
Right.
Versus, like, what does it mean to have friends who can push back, challenge, disagree, have different opinions than me? That's what real biblical friendship is. When Jesus says, I've called you friends, he doesn't mean, like, hey, I'm just here to, like, validate everything you already think. What he's saying is, like, actually, I'm going to turn your whole life upside down. This is the same Jesus who says elsewhere in Scripture, right? Unless a man hates his father and mother, he can't follow me unless he, if he puts his hand to the plow and looks back. Don't go bury your father and mother, instead follow me. Like, there's a very radical call to discipleship.
Yeah.
And so the idea that friendship needs to be sharpening, like we see in Proverbs, right? That there should be this, there's going to be friction, there's going to be conflict, there's going to be people who can push back and disagree. That's actually what healthy friendships involve and require.
Yeah.
That's one of the simple biblical things we have to recover, is that my friends aren't just like fans. Fans are different than friends.
Fans, that's a great point. Fans are different than friends, and friends don't have to think exactly alike, which it's fascinating you said that, because one of the things I was reflecting on, like, in coming up to this podcast, was how much I love you and how much I've really benefited by God's grace being friends over the years. And also, we're really different.
Yeah.
I mean, we're both super intense lead pastors and also wired differently and with some different gifts. And we've had we're like, hey, this is my take on, we've had conversations where we're like, we're sharpening. Hey, we're not seeing eye to eye on this, and we're going back and forth and sharpening. And even times where we're like, okay, let's hug it out later. Did I say that in a way that was offensive, or did I say this in a way that missed honoring you?
Yeah.
Like, we've had like those kind of like, hey, let's make sure we're in a good place right now, which happens when you're actually trying to sharpen each other. And I totally agree. That's one of the, like, I've really benefited and grown by being friends with you.
Well, likewise. And I want to think about, like, when you talk about spiritual friendship, how is spiritual friendship different than just friendship? So there's, like, a common grace reality here of, like, I think there's a baseline human reality that every human being needs friends. But then what is it that discipleship to Jesus adds on top of just that baseline layer of, like, because you're talking about is, like, yeah, we live in a culture that kind of has deprioritized even friendship. But there's also a way that redemption in Jesus should take friendship to a different level.
Yes.
And one of the ways I think that we've experienced that in our friendship is just that sense of, like, yeah, I need friends who, like, we love Christ enough we're pursuing Christ together in ways that, like, yeah, we don't get our feelings hurt. We can disagree, but in love, we don't feel a need to disagree just to prove that we're like, that we're different.
Sure.
You know, it's just a sense of like, there's actually a ton of stuff we agree on.
Yeah.
There's some things we disagree on. We can like mock each other in friendly ways, you know, that are just like
which
sarcastic,
totally
but joyful.
Yes.
All of that is made possible by the sort of common fellowship with Christ that we have that pulls us into this new community of you know, the church, the people of God.
I think that's a good theme for us to explore a little bit. You're like, there's friendship, which is a common grace reality that even people who don't believe have friends.
Yeah.
But spiritual friendship is, what are the gospel resources and gospel call that we bring to friendship?
Yeah.
And it made me think, when you said that way, it made me think of Ephesians 4, which, you know, Ephesians 4 opens with this emphasis on unity, in the unity of the Spirit. But then there's difference, but grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. And so it's like you're called to live out humble unity, keep the unity of the Spirit, speaking to a community of the church. But you're different. And the whole context is like, hey, you're going to be in a community and be friends with people who are different than you.
Well, yeah, and I think it's interesting that the Bible's metaphor is family, right? The family of God. Because if you think about like what makes Christian friendship unique, the way we generally think about friendship is, I want to be friends with people who are like me and who kind of like share my same interests, right? Mm-hmm. But in the church also, it's just like, I'm actually friends with these people just because we're united in Christ. And so there's a sense of like, we share something that's actually just like, it's not based on common likes, common interests. It's based on a common Savior.
Yes.
And so there's this sense of like, we get one another, whether we like it or not. These are people I'm going to spend eternity with. So now I get called into this kind of friendship. It's like it's a friendship that starts with unity and then works it out, rather than, hey, let's start with just like we both live in the same neighborhood and let's see if we can get to unity.
Right. Yeah. No. At the starting, there's a family metaphor going on in Ephesians, and also the body metaphor, which is the parts are different.
Yep.
Not everyone's the same. Not everyone does the same thing. I wonder if we could explore that. So maybe one of the implications of this, hey, for people in Coram Deo, because I mean, everyone's going to listen to this podcast now. This is going to be huge.
It's
Omaha.
It's going to blow up. It's definitely going to blow up.
It's going to blow up. And for people at Covenant who would hear this podcast, maybe one of the pushes is, hey, be open to friendship with people in your group that are different than you. Mm-hmm. Be open to friendship with people who are like maybe a different age bracket. Like, hey, I'm just going to learn from her walk with Jesus. I'm going to learn from his walk with Jesus. I'm just going to benefit from someone who's different from me and their insights into Jesus and the life and their experience. That's really powerful.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, we need to have the word friendship defined by Jesus and work it out from there. Meaning, like, you know, Christ calls us to a certain kind of fellowship. And when he says in John 17, I've called you friends, you know, he's not just taking a word that you already use and adding to it himself. I think what he's doing is saying like, hey, I define what this word means. Like I've called you friends, and that word means what it means because of who I am and what I've done.
So let's go back to John 15 and think how Jesus defines friends. Do you want to like riff on that a little bit?
I'm happy to riff in whatever texts you want to riff on.
Well, it's like, hey, this is my commandment, that you may love one another as I have loved you. So that's the call. Mm-hmm. Love one another as I have loved you. Greater love
that's challenging. I just need to repent every day for not doing that.
Right.
So that's
totally.
We could read no more verses.
That should slay us. That's done.
That's enough work for me for the rest of my life.
Let's just stop there. And then next verse, greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends.
Yeah. So
Jesus defines friendship as laying your life down for people.
Yeah.
one of the ways you've done that, I think there's a decision. Here's one of the things I've been thinking a lot about, and like by God's grace. So we're both part of this Soul Brothers group. It's us two and Hunter Beaumont, Josh Curry, and Kevin Cawley. And we're like, hey, let's pour into each other's lives. It's 5 of us, and we're going to get together in a couple weeks. Next weekend with our wives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, for that weekend, and pray for each other, seek to benefit from each other, catch up with each other. And I think I've been thinking about how, hey, we need faith to step out and love, to love people. Like, hey, this person's in need. I'm going to be a friend. It's also, we need faith to receive friendship. This is what I mean. When we're really at a low point, and one of the ways you've blessed me, in the last 8 years, there's been significant challenges in my family. There's just been things I personally have been going through. I've been in some low points, and you've had some things too where you're like, hey, here's a dark spot I'm working through. Yeah. By God's grace, I let you in and the other Soul Brothers, and you let us in. Yeah. Like, you have to let people in. Yeah. To be hey, let's step out and be a friend, but you also have to be like, hey guys, I need some friends right now. Yeah. Like, hey, I'm in a low point. I'm like going through something really tough. And like, your prayers for me have meant a lot. Like, when you've just been like, we've talked about something on the phone, you're like, I'm going to pray for you right now. But yeah, the challenge to, in this cultural moment, I think it's especially hard. Hey, we're all selfish and doing our own thing. There's that. But it's also a gospel move to let people in and receive care. Yeah. So there's 2 things I think in my life that the Soul Brothers sort of reflect. One is my friend Will Walker always says, you grow out of commitment, not into it. Huh. Like, we tend to think as Americans, like, oh, I'll start tithing once I grow a lot as a Christian, or I'll really commit to friendship once I get once my kids raised, or whatever, right? It's sort of like, I'll get to a place where I'm ready to commit to something like grow out of commitment. Yeah, he says you make the commitment on the front end, and then that's what makes you grow. And what I noticed about the Soul Brothers is we kind of just said, like, hey guys, what if we just commit to doing this and see how it goes? We said, like, let's get together. That's what we did. We said, let's stack hands. Let's just do this on getting together twice a year. Yeah, getting together twice a year for multiple days. Yeah, and just let's commit to it. And what's happened is our friendships have actually been forged out of that commitment. I don't feel like it wasn't like I knew Steve Huber super deeply and I was like, yes, dude, let's do this. It was like, I actually didn't know you that well, but we had mutual friends who were like, hey, this is going to be great. Here's the guys. We had hung out and had, meals, and our wives had hung out before, but we hadn't didn't have that regular time until we made a commitment to, hey, actually, let's pour into each other. So what's interesting about that to me is that those friendships have been a means of grace in my life, of the Lord revealing to me, like, actually a lot of friendship has less to do with like what just sort of serendipitously happens as you do life, and more like, what are you willing to commit to? So it's about intentionality. Yeah, there's a ton of intentionality. Maybe it's like be open to people, being friends with people that are different than you. Yeah. And being intentional, and like the Liberty Church in Harrisburg, you know how they talk about this, committing to relational pursuit. Yeah, that's a great way to say it. Which is interesting, like, hey, I'm actually going to be intentional relationally. Well, and so what's funny is if you take anybody who works with leaders, lead pastors are leaders, but, you think about leaders in business or in the arts or in government, most of those people would say, like, hey, you need a cohort. You need to be part of a cohort of other leaders who are like learning from one another. Right. And so there's all these artificial ways to build those, right? Sure. And so we've just sort of said, like, well, that's kind of what the Soul Brothers is. It's like, it's both. It's not just we're committing to friendship. It's also like, actually, the sharpening we need as leaders is less about like, hey, Steve, what are you guys doing for your sermon series this year or for small groups? And it's more about like, hey,
I just need some guys who can like enter in with me into some of the burdens I'm carrying, some of the sadness I'm carrying, or the darkness I'm carrying, or the difficult things I'm walking through as a human being or as a leader, and just like pray for me in that.
Yeah.
Share that burden with me. Know that that's happening. Check in on me.
Yes.
That the things that trip people up in discipleship and in life are usually those kinds of like ongoing, persistent difficulties that are either relational in nature or based on leadership or based on things going on in family. It's just like those are the things that we actually need people in our lives to enter in with, and you can't do that in one moment, right? It happens over time.
It happens over time. It's gotten deeper over time.
Yeah.
You know what Josh Curry's kids call our cohort? Call it Josh's brohort. Did you know that joke? No. It's the brohort. They're like, hey, you're going to go talk. You're going to go hang out with your brohort, which has gotten deeper over time. And it's interesting. There's like, I mean, we're trading books like, hey, you should buy this book. You know, we all need to read this book and then we're going to talk about it. So it's like high level leadership stuff, what's happening in the culture, servant leader challenges. Like, hey, I'm trying to lead the church through this kind of growth period or this kind of challenge.
Yeah.
Personal things, hey, I'm wrestling with this, pray for me about this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, a growth area in my life is revealed. It's kind of all those things. And sometimes, we touch on all of those things, but sometimes there's like a focus on kind of like one particular area.
Yeah. Well, and I'm trying to think about what makes, because I've got friends in my church who are like part of these groups that are like business coaching groups, and I think what makes Soul Brothers different is that the spiritual friendship is kind of the base, the thing we're actually after, and the other stuff arises out of that. Like, because you're my friend, you have a ton of wisdom to speak into leadership challenges in my life or personal challenges in my life. I would need that regardless, but I'm probably going to hear that differently from someone I'm like, oh, I love that guy, I trust that guy, rather than just like, oh, I know that guy has some leadership wisdom to give me.
Right.
Right. So
and just getting like, hey, I'll just be coached in leadership wisdom,
right,
but not
in heart stuff,
other stuff.
Yeah.
So statistically, a lot of pastors are lonely.
Yes. And
some of that, I mean, so much is happening in the world, in the church. Evangelicalism is fracturing. So a lot of times people leave churches for various different kinds of reasons. And if you're a pastor who cares, that's kind of heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And by kind of heartbreaking, I mean totally heartbreaking, right? And we both experience that. And but one of the things, don't we believe this? This is one of the things we talked about. Hey, pastors shouldn't be lonely.
Right.
Drug dealers don't smoke what they sell. Pastors should.
Right.
Like when, hey, we talk about being in community, being friends with Jesus. Let's both be, and I know this is your heart too, I want to be growing in brotherhood and friendship with the elders of this church, with the staff of this church and the leaders of this church and the people of this church. And in the leadership community, you have like tighter bonds. And also it's really healthy to be blessed by like friends outside the church.
Yeah.
And to learn from other churches.
Well, and I think that's what you see all throughout church history and in the New Testament. You have, when you hear Paul at the end of his letters commend people, he's like, hey, so-and-so sends greetings, and send this guy to me. But there seems to be around him both like a tighter community of leaders who are like on the journey with him, but he's also greeting people from other cities
from
that he
different
has
churches
that he has deep relationships with. And so you need both.
Which is a fascinating thing to point out, because like it was super fun to have you and Hunter were here in February.
Yeah, it was
first
fun.
Weekend of February. It was really fun to have you here, and we were in spiritual rhythm. We were seeking to grow in generosity, so I had you speak into that. But by God's grace, we've been able to stand in front of the churches that we're called to lead and say, hey, here's a friend coming to bless this church, and I know and trust this guy. It's been fun to like seek to bless our friend's church.
Well, and you guys came we bought a new building and had like a dedication And all the Soul Brothers came to celebrate that moment with me as a leader.
Yes.
But then you spoke to our church members and said, like, each of you kind of gave a charge of like, hey, here's what I think you need to think about in this moment, which is really like our church members still talk about that because they know what you guys mean to me personally.
That was special.
But then they also like, oh, I remember when Steve said that or when Hunter said that, and like they charged me with what my responsibility as a church member is in this moment of our mission. And that was really powerful.
That was really special to celebrate that with you and also with your church.
Yeah.
And also, I was happy to say to your church, and I remember what I said. I was like, I stood up in front of Coram Deo and was like, hey, have you ever been somewhere you learned something about your dad that you didn't know? I was like, here's something about Pastor Bob Thune's ministry that you might not know.
Yeah.
Because you're here all the time.
Yeah.
You probably don't know how deeply appreciated he is in other churches and how his writings have really blessed and strengthened the church. You're like an indie rock band that's huge in Japan. But
I think you did.
India,
I think you said exactly that.
In India, I made that exact joke because Bob's writings have really benefited the church in India, especially in southern India.
Yeah.
And that's just significant. And I don't think that and I just wanted to encourage Coram Deo about the grace of God coming through you to the wider church.
Well, and that's a meaningful thing that friends do for one another, right? Is just like that simple, like, hey, you might not know this, but here's a way that you're a blessing, And I think about the way you, Steve, have engaged my kids, you and Christine both, but like my kids know like, oh, Steve's not only my dad's friends, but like Steve's interested in my life. Like he asked me questions about like what's going on in my world. And yeah, it's like
Uncle Steve cares.
Yeah. And and they like, my kids are like, oh, the Hubers are coming. Well, we'll be there. It's just like anytime really you guys fun. Are coming through town, they want to be at the dinner table. They want to be there. They want to be in the room engaging with you guys. Even my son Lewis is here on this trip with me because we were just on a road trip together, and he's like, cool, I want to ride bikes with Steve Huber. That sounds awesome.
Cool. We just got to do that this afternoon.
Yeah.
Lewis on the single speed was killing it. Well, hey, I have a surprise question for you.
Oh, wow.
Are you ready for this?
I guess.
You're going to have no more face.
I didn't know I was going to get surprises. Let's go.
In a world of predictable questions, one man refuses to conform. This is Huber's surprise question.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
I knew that would deeply bless you.
I love everything about that.
That was AI. And Jonathan made that. Here's a surprise question. What would be your hope and prayer for the Soul Brothers friendship in the next years to come? Where does your mind go?
I think the simple answer is my hope and prayer is that those friendships are deeper, stronger, and more life-giving 10 years from now than they even are now.
Yes.
I just think that life is long, and I want to be like retired and still hanging out with you guys, in the sense that like those friendships are long-term. I think about the friendships that are most meaningful in my life are the ones that have lasted the longest, right? And have gone through various seasons with me. I think I was telling you, last weekend, had my college roommate in town who lives across the world, and we don't see each other very often. Last time I saw him was 5 years ago.
Wow.
But that's a friendship.
But you've known him how many years?
Yeah, I've known him since we were 20, and I'm 50. So, having a chance to just reconnect was really powerful. But that's like, those friendships are few and far between, So friendships that are like, oh, we have 30 years of history together.
Yes. Yeah.
Soul Brothers have 10, 12 years of history with each other. But, I look forward to the day of like, oh, we have 25 years of history with each other. And so the jokes we tell and the stories we tell are just like deeper and long.
Go back.
Yeah, they go back further,
decades, Right. Decades running jokes.
Yeah.
And love for each other.
Yeah.
And by God's grace, blessing to each other. Well, hey, buddy, friend, thank you so much for being my friend. Thank you so much for
being my friend, podcast. Steve Huber.
All right.
I want everybody in Covenant Church to have deep, meaningful friendships the way that we are trying to model as best we can.
We're trying to grow in it.
And the ways that God's gifted us with that.
Yeah, we're trying to grow in it. We're trying to take. We're not saying we're doing it perfectly, but we want to continue to grow in it.
Yep.
And it's something that God calls us to. So, Covenant Church, I hope this stirs you up as we go through this series to be intentional about spiritual friendship. And thanks so much. Until next time, thanks for tuning in to the Covenant Table Podcast.